Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on in, come on in. Make yourself comfortable. Welcome, my beautiful, powerful patients. This is Tezra. I am your mental chiropractor where I'm here to help you realign your mind and take back your power and plop yourself back down into the driver's seat of your life so you can drive your life in the direction that you want to go and not in the direction that society will have you to go. Because trust and believe me, that is the wrong road. Like Portia said, wrong road, wrong road. Okay, y'all. So listen, I came across this video here. As you can see on the screen, it is, I'm going to show you the title of this video. It's a hidden Black society they don't teach you about. So I haven't watched this video as yet. I want to watch it in real time with you. And I thank you for being here. And if you would do me a favor and go ahead and check in. And when I say check in, you know, I mean, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. I'm almost at 250. Can we get to 250, ladies and gentlemen? It would be so appreciative if we could get to 250. I'm almost there. So please go ahead and subscribe and like this video if you like the content of my channel. And I think that's about it. Yes. So let's go ahead and pop on over to this video and see what they are talking about.
Dismal swamp. Hundreds of years ago, this sprawling wetland about the size of Delaware stretched down the east coast. The swamp was brimming with snakes and bears and mosquitoes so thick you couldn't see a few feet in front of you. Yet hidden inside was a refuge to tens of thousands of Black people called Maroons who escaped the bonds of slavery, some living free for generations. Maroons didn't just run away or survive in the swamp. They grew into a state-sized stronghold against chattel slavery that lasted more than 250 years in the middle of the South. I'm Harini Butt. Welcome to the heart of Black American resistance, the Great Dismal Swamp. Great Dismal Swamp Maroons were not just one community, but many communities. We can think of them in three main groups. Each was shaped by where they lived in the swamp and how they resisted slavery. But how did they get to the swamp in the first place? In colonial Virginia, both Black and white laborers endured brutal abuses and ran away regularly. Early Maroons likely had help getting to the swamp from indigenous peoples.
So I just wanted to comment on the fact that it says everything is in quotes. Okay. When I use black and white, just note that it's in quotes. So when they said that the Black and the white laborers were brutally beaten, and if you would listen to, you know, historically how mainstream media or the corporate news or the textbooks, the lessons, the teachings, in order to keep our minds programmed and conditioned to think a certain way, to have this certain belief embedded into the subconscious. It was the beatings and the brutal treatments was all reserved for who? The quote Black end quote slave or the African slave, right? That is who the beatings were reserved for. They would never tell you about the fact that the quote white end quote laborers, they got beat too, or, you know, there was some torturous treatment of them as well, because that narrative is only reserved for the Black population. That narrative, that story is only reserved for the Black population. So I'm sure that even when she said this, that some of the minds out there may have been like what? Black and white labor were brutally beaten, like, huh? Because they don't want the public, they don't want the masses to know that both groups were treated inhumanely. Because if that's the case, you know, let alone the trauma bonding between the melanated people, but then we'll have the low melanateds and the melanateds trauma bonding. Oh no, we can't do that, because then that will be the rise of the trauma bonders, and they just may overtake our asses, and down comes our power structure. So I just thought that was interesting.
Many Algonquin-speaking tribes and others had lived along the swamp's coast for thousands of years and were now being driven off their land. But the first major evidence of Great Dismal Marronage came in 1730. Known as the Chesapeake Rebellion, it was set off by a rumor that King George II granted freedom to baptized enslaved people. When they were denied their freedom, several hundred enslaved people led a revolt that was ultimately suppressed by local authorities. Some 200 enslaved people managed to escape to the swamp. However, entering the swamp was not for the faint of heart, according to an account from the famous fugitive Harriet Jacobs. Quote, "As evening approached, the number of snakes increased so much that we were continually obliged to thrash them with sticks to keep them from crawling over us." Unquote. Harriet fled to the swamp to escape sexual violence from her enslaver and the threat of sale. She later wrote, "But even those large, venomous snakes were less dreadful to my imagination than the white men in that community called civilized." People who persevered many miles into the swamp became interior Maroons. These Maroons forged dozens of new societies sustained by nature. Deep inside the swamp were at least 200 small islands where Maroons built cabins and planted crops. They grew corn, beans, and rice, foraged cattails and berries, and hunted wild hogs and deer. They even tended livestock and bees for honey and wax for candles, which they bartered with one another. Interior Maroon communities raised their children in freedom, which they guarded fiercely. They lived in secrecy and were known to carefully monitor surrounding areas and vet new members. For several generations, these communities thrived through cooperation with each other and with nature. The fact that Maroons were self-sufficient contradicted the false narrative that enslaved people couldn't take care of themselves and, in fact, were content at being enslaved for their own good. So perhaps it's not surprising that the slave-owning society found Maroons' existence terrifying. One fearful Virginia landowner, William Byrd
Did you catch that? She said that the slave owner society found the Maroon people terrifying. Why? Because they had power over their own lives. The Maroons, had power over their own lives. And that is a huge threat to the slave owners society. And today it translates to a threat to the power structure. Do you see? This is what I've been talking about the entire time. Once we reclaim our power, and see, that's why for people like Umar Johnson and others, let me see. I don't want to say Charleston White because I'm not going to put Charleston White in that category. But for the people who really appeal to the victimhood mentality and take advantage of that, they're safe. They're safe and sound. Nobody is going to come for them because they are not liberating the minds of other people. Because once you liberate the minds of other people, then the game is over. The shtick is up. They lose the grasp on the stronghold of the mind. And once that grasp is loosened, then that's it. You no longer have power over that person. You no longer have agency over that person. So I really appreciate this narrative that this host is sharing, because she is, and like she said before, they put a spin on the narratives. This is why this story is never told or not told in popularity, because it does not fit the narrative. It does not fit the agenda of the spun narrative, which is, if you are a melanated person of the African diaspora, or what I call an MPAD, then your history is only that of enslavement. It's only that of being oppressed. It's only that of being brutally beaten and raped and pillaged. So I said before, This is the era where the truth is coming to the surface and there's nothing that no one can do about it. And the power structure, the ones behind the curtain, they know this. And so at this point, they are just getting very sloppy with their work because they're desperate. Because they're about to, and they are losing their stronghold.
Second tried to breach the swamp. His men barely reached 1.5 miles a day, reportedly getting mired in the bog, unable to penetrate the tall reeds and thorny brush. After 8 days, they ran out of supplies and abandoned their attempt. Byrd warned colonial authorities that if no action was taken, the Great Dismal Swamp Maroons could become a powerful force threatening the surrounding region. Interior Maroons had escaped beyond American society's reach. Other Maroons, however, carved out a free life for themselves right under society's nose. The second and most common group of Great Dismal Maroons were fringe Maroons. These Maroons were people who had fled slavery but lived on the outer edges or fringes of the swamp, often to stay close to family members who remained enslaved. In one case, a mother and her 2 children became Maroons while her husband stayed behind in a labor camp to support them. There are many cases like this, but escape attempts also came with extreme risks. Slave owners would enact severe punishments, such as public lashings, branding, cutting off ears, or forcing people to wear iron bits. Fringe Maroons stayed hidden by developing secret codes to communicate with nearby enslaved people. For example, a shirt hung in just the right way could signal that it was safe to move around. Some enslaved people joined Maroons for just a few weeks or months for a break from the unrelenting labor. Many were also determined to take back reproductive well-being and control over their bodies. For others, especially in the 1800s, the swamp was a pit stop on the Underground Railroad, useful for thousands intent on continuing toward freedoms in the North. As more and more people became fringe Maroons, slave owners were losing control of people they considered property, and their plantations were being regularly raided by the very people they had enslaved. In Norfolk, Virginia, officials declared a state of emergency after Maroons killed several white men, reporting that, quote, one slave owner received a note from these amazing fellows suggesting it would be healthier for him to remain indoors at night. And he did, unquote. But for the most part, French Maroons survived through mutual aid with each other and those still enslaved. This was a key tactic also used by a third group, the Canal Maroons. In 1763, the Dismal Swamp Canal Company set out to turn the swamp into a source of profit. The company was founded by 12 wealthy slave owners, including the future president of the United States, George Washington. They proposed draining the swamp in order to grow crops like hemp for the US Navy and turn trees into roofing shingles. To move these products, the shareholders envisioned a canal that cut through the swamp and connected the Chesapeake Bay to the Albemarle Sound. The canal was completed in 1805, built by the hard work of enslaved people, many of whom encountered Maroons or escaped themselves. Enslaved laborers, or so-called shingle getters, often subcontracted their work to Canal Maroons in exchange for goods from the outside world and rest. This meant that an enslaved shingle getter would show up with 2 to 3 times their expected quota in shingles and wood staves. This arrangement proved so lucrative that overseers who were well aware of the arrangement would look the other way. Despite strict laws and increased policing to capture Maroons, crew bosses would even hire Canal Maroons directly, either accepting fake free documents or choosing to ignore their legal status. Ultimately, both Fringe and Canal Maroons found freedom on their own terms, while staying connected to society. One married couple, Venus and Jack, who worked on the canal, would later become Maroons after 3 attempts to flee. They were determined to stay together and use their knowledge of the swamp to finally escape. Even with these daring acts of self-emancipation, there were still others who aimed to break slavery altogether and overthrow the whole system. Since the beginning of American slavery, enslaved people have staged more than 250 slave rebellions. The Great Dismal Swamp empowered several wide-scale rebellions, most famously the Easter Conspiracy of 1802. Set for June 10th, the plan was to kill as many white slave owners as needed to secure their freedom and, quote, rest assured that our tyrants shall soon be taught lessons by our resentment that humility has never taught them, unquote. By May, the plans had spread too widely, and many conspirators were discovered. Dozens of people were captured, and dozens more were killed or deported from the country. Tom Copper, an infamous general of the conspiracy and a Maroon, was arrested in Elizabeth City. In an incredible act of loyalty, 6 black men arrived on horseback and broke Copper out of jail. 4 of the men were captured, but 2 men escaped, including Copper, who never appeared in the record again. Maroons who dared to rebel acted not just for themselves, but for all enslaved people still trapped in bondage. Those who survived likely retreated back to the swamp, where they may have remained until the Civil War. Archaeological records show remains of Maroon communities in the swamp up to roughly 1865, suggesting that most Maroons left the swamp when the war ended. Maroons rejoined society, including an elder Maroon at least 80 years old, according to one report, quote, whose locks were as white as the driven snow, unquote. He said, now that I have lived to see the freedom of my race and to know that I am a free man, I am ready to quit this world and go up yonder. Maroons have existed everywhere racial chattel slavery has existed in the world, and are especially known in places like Jamaica, Suriname, Brazil, and Haiti. For the Great Dismal Swamp Maroons, experts have only recently uncovered more of their history, partly because of the Maroons' own secrecy, and partly due to the challenges of examining a historical record, often written by the ruling class. Above all, Maroons wanted to be free. Most Maroons were ordinary people who were creative, hardworking, and tenacious in creating a better life for themselves and their children. Their legacy can be felt throughout the history of Black resistance, from the Underground Railroad to the Civil Rights era and Black Power era to the Black Lives Matter movement. In any time and place, wherever you find shackles of injustice, there are people creating their own keys. Before you go, I need to talk about PBS. Congress recently eliminated funding to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funds public television and radio stations across the United States. Many of these stations are PBS members, and while PBS itself is not entirely dependent on federal funds, these cuts will significantly impact the system. Local stations need direct support now more than ever, especially smaller stations who are facing the very real threat of closure. If you want to support PBS's mission, follow the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to donate to your local station. Any amount goes a long way. Thank you.
Wow, wow, and wow. That was so freaking informative. I love learning things like that because I did not know that when I was growing up, when I was being reared, as they say, and being pushed through the school system. So the Maroons, huh? The Maroons. I'm sure some of you out there already are well versed on the Maroons. I am not. And one thing that takeaway for me was that she said they created their own keys. And that is what we are to do today. They have set the example for us today, for us to create our own keys, for us to release ourselves from our own mental imprisonment. We do not realize that we are in our own mental prisons. And yet we have the keys ourselves. We don't realize that. We don't realize that we have the keys. We don't even have to create the keys. We have the keys. We own the keys. We are in possession of the keys. So if you watched my last video with the Dancer Project, the tissue paper thin interview with Umar and the Dancer Project, I speak on that. I speak on the fact that, well, I just forgot my thought, but you can go check out the video, and I hope that you find it very helpful and insightful. But anyway, so that is going to do it for me today. I'm going to end our session, and I hope that these videos are just getting our minds a little more aligned each and every time, and that when you're using the words, the labels, remember I talked about that, and that's what I was going to say. That's what I talked about in that video between the interview of Umar and the Dancer Project, is that when you're using labels, use them conscientiously. And if you are just using them just because this is what society has given you to use, then you're working under the programming, because those labels has a very limited negative connotation attached. So just realize that I did a post that talked about words and how they're spelling words because they cast spells. So just be careful of the words that you use, especially when talking to yourself, or talking about yourself, or that mental conversation that you are having with yourself. All of those words that you are using, they're either being used to build, strengthen, or fortify the prison bars, or to break them down, dismantle, and destroy the prison bars. Okay, so just make sure that you are staying aware of where you are vibrating mentally and the language and the words that you are using. All right, until then, my beautiful, powerful patients, make sure that you check in by subscribing. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button for me. One little flicker of your finger means the world to my channel, as on the road to 250. So until then, stay empowered.